Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Flakstad, and we are super excited to kick off this new and unique podcast series called the Midlife Truth Project. So this podcast series is really our attempt to help women feel less alone and more supported as they transition into midlife. My co-host for this incredible journey is none other than the amazing Dr. Taz Bhatia. For those who don't know Dr. Taz, she is an absolute pioneer in integrative health. She's also the founder of Center Spring MD, which is really an incredible practice in Atlanta that also includes an equally robust telehealth platform. She's also a best-selling author, including her latest book that I have right here called The Hormone Shift. It's an absolute must-read for every woman. Today's episode is more of an introduction. It's an introduction to us and an introduction to the series overall. We're calling this conversation, this midlife truth, Go Deep, because that's what women want at this stage in our lives. More meaningful, more authentic, more vulnerable conversations. And we'll go deep by sharing our own personal midlife stories so you can get to know us better and understand why midlife is absolutely a story that needs to be told. So let's do this. Let's talk truth.
Where do women in their 40s, 50s, and beyond go to find solutions when their bodies begin to change? Womaness is the leading women's wellness brand, modernizing aging through education, inspiration, and clean solutions formulated to meet the needs of our changing bodies. Their best-selling Me.No.Pause supplement takes on perimenopause and menopause's toughest symptoms. You guys know these: hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, and so much more. Just one pill a day can help with more than 6 of these symptoms. Womaness is available nationwide at Ulta Beauty, Amazon, and on womaness.com. Get 20% off orders of $50 or more by heading to womaness.com/midlife and using the code midlife20 at checkout. Womaness, live fully and age well.
Drum roll. I am so excited to introduce the brilliant Dr. Taz. So thank you for being here, and just thank you for being you.
I think this has been so fun, Julie. It's been such a joy to work with you and to get to know you. And I think we're both aligned on really reaching women out there to help them navigate this phase of life, which honestly hasn't gotten a lot of attention. So I am proud to be your wing woman and proud to be on this journey and ride with you, and really cannot wait for some of these amazing conversations that we have lined out.
Oh, that's good. I am so excited. We're going to talk a little bit more about who that is. I have to, just for anyone who can see us, I have to just share this picture. Do you remember when we first met? Here it is. Here, I'm putting it on the screen.
Yes, I do. Yes.
It was like a year ago. I think it was in October at the Let's Talk Menopause event. And I was just like completely drawn to you on many levels. But I wish, before I go into that, I just wanted to if you could share with us a little bit more about yourself. Obviously I shared the big broad brushstrokes, but share with us a little bit more about who you are, inside work, outside work, and kind of the different roles and hats that you wear.
Definitely. It's been such an incredible journey. And I think I speak from a place of really great gratitude. I think I've had an incredible ride, not with some hits along the way, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But, I'm an integrative physician. I started out as a physician over probably 30 years ago, started in pediatrics and in the emergency room. And then because of my own personal health, segued into integrative and holistic medicine to get answers, honestly. And that journey of not getting answers, not really being able, to get what I needed out of the traditional medical experience really drove the building of my practices, my desire to speak, my desire to educate when it comes to all things women's health. And that story was very much a hormone story. So that has been an unexpected journey. I have no business background. I didn't know I had an entrepreneurial spirit. I really came at this with I want to do something. I want to build something. But it's really interesting to watch young people today with their business plans and their forecasting and all the things that they're doing. I didn't have any of that. This was literally my husband looking at me and being like, I think you need to do something about this. You're pretty passionate about this. Come open in the back of my dental office. And that's how we began. Now, that story and that journey is coupled with a family story, right? I have 2 children. I think our children are very close in age. I have a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. The practice is exactly 15 years old. And all of it was happening at the same time. And I think that the journey of, building something both internally with the family and then externally with this practice and this mission and this career has been a juggling act that I've had to be very careful and navigate, kind of delicately. And so I come into this having learned a ton of lessons. And some of them were hard-won lessons, some of them are a little bit simpler. But my hope, between my own personal experience of this juggle and what I've learned from so many of the patients that I've sat with — we've sat with probably over 30,000 patients at this point, many of
Amazing.
them women, majority women, honestly — is like we have a universal story. The problem is that we are not prepared and not equipped until we get into these different transitions and changes. And then it just feels like things are hitting us and we don't have answers. And that's on the familial front. And that's definitely on the business front. And it's definitely in the medical front. And so I think for me, it's like merging that collective experience together, but making it useful for anybody that's out there listening, because we're all at different points of a healing journey, right? We're all at different points of a family journey. And I think it's really important, to talk about what we've experienced instead of like hiding it or brushing it under the covers or being shameful
Mm.
or, not having a place to go to get answers. So I hope, with the work that we're doing together, that we're really able to reach women at various stages of where they are in these transitions.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you said that. And again, your focus clinically is very much a holistic focus. And I love that. That's one of the reasons why I was drawn to you, is because you take such a holistic view of our lives in general, right? And so I don't think that as women, we give ourselves enough grace to realize like this is a lot. I want to go back for a second though, because, I want to know even more about Dr. Taz. So you are married, correct?
Mary just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary.
Yeah. And then I also, want you to share, as many women, you wear many hats in the sense you're also a daughter and a sister. Will you share with us just a little bit about what that looks like for you?
Like many of us do, I think. I come from a pretty interesting family. I'm, the daughter of Indian immigrants for sure. And I think navigating that cultural landscape has been interesting as well, challenging for sure at times. And, there is definitely — my son and I were actually talking about this. He's studying Chinese right now and learning a lot about Chinese culture. And I think in a lot of Eastern cultures, the words he used was there's a lot of filial piety, where your elders and your parents are more important than you, the person, and you, your own, whatever it is that you individually want. So that's a construct that's very different from our American culture, where it's very much about the individual and what I created, and it's more I than we. And, that's a very different perspective. So I think I spent a lot of my early years like trying to navigate that divide, like, like this is what they want, this is what I want, this is what they want, this is what I want. And then I have two sisters, and one is about 4 or 5 years younger than me. The other one is significantly younger than me. She's about 19 years younger than me. And so we're all relatively close, but it's been interesting to watch their journey as well as women, and some of how they've dealt with the background that we came from. We did not have a peaceful family home or childhood home. I think I've been candid about that in many, many times. And I think you and I talked about it too. And I think when you leave a family home that is sort of built in chaos and dysfunction, you have a lot of different choices of how you're going to take that experience, and I think we've each made different choices with that legacy. And it's been interesting to see how that plays out. So, so there are a lot of influences, upon me. I always joke that I talk about merging medicine, but I'm like such a merge of so many different things, right? Like I've got an immigrant Asian sort of background, but at the same time, I was raised in the South, went to, the private schools here in the Atlanta, Georgia area, very influenced by that. Many of them were Christian private schools, so very influenced by that culture and their expectations and their beliefs, and then, went off to medical school and did my thing, came back and ended up marrying a man from India, which I swore I'd never do. I promised I would never do. In fact, we were joking. because he did his DNA test recently, because my mom was always like, you need to marry somebody from India. I'm like, hell no, and I think I dated everybody else. And so here I go. I married this guy who moved here when he was 16 years old, is actually from the same region that my mother grew up in, which is God's sense of humor, I'm sure. But it was so funny because he did a DNA test recently, and he's got like, it's like a significant proportion of his DNA is English, actually, because they had an English grandmother. So I promptly sent a message to my mom, like, look, I didn't marry an Indian. I actually married a white guy. So anyhow, so all of that to say, all of these stories to say, basically, I am a mixed up hodgepodge melting pot of lots of different influences. And so I have tried to take all of those experiences and pick out the best pieces of them, right? And how they can make us stronger, how they can make us whole, how they can build family and community, and then how to navigate those challenges, right? There's so much. I joke that, having been raised in that family, I knew nothing until more recently about India or Indian culture. And I feel like I'm on a learning curve there, which you would think, having grown up in that family, I would have learned earlier. So, there are a lot of pieces. And now it's interesting to raise our own children and figure out how much of the culture we want to gift to them, how Americanized, quote unquote, are they, what's the value system that they have that they're going to carry forward? Do they have any sense of filial piety, which is now getting diluted and watered down as you move through, the generations? So
I hope so for your sake.
Yes, I approach family. We all do, right? They always say 2 words, Mom, nursing home. And I'm like, that is not nice. That is not nice. But anyhow, so I don't know. I mean, I think that I just bring that kind of mixed up bag of experiences into these conversations and that perspective. And I know there are many, I'm not alone in that. I know there are many people out there who have sort of a similar heritage or legacy of coming in from different cultures and different expectations, and then having to serve a lot of different roles: wife, mother, daughter, sister, colleague, boss, mentor. There are all these different roles that we all play. And we as women, and I wrote about this in the Superwoman RX, each of us individually kind of hold up at least 20 to 30 people, whether we realize it or not. And so that's another reason why what we're doing is so important, because I think women have to understand that when our ship goes down, we never sink alone. We're usually carrying a lot of other folks along the way with us. So I think that the role of us as women and our role in family, our role in community is a really critical one and ultimately builds society. So I couldn't be more excited about being here and talking about all of this.
I'm going to repeat that. When the ship goes down, the ship does not go down alone.
No. Not at all. Not at all. We are at the center. You could probably name 5 women that literally hold up, 20 other people around them,
100%.
So.
That needs to be like needle pointed on a pillow somewhere. I actually know someone who has a company like that. I'm going to send that
there
to
we
her.
go.
I want to back up on, first of all, something that you said that I just want to, shed a light on or just kind of amplify. And that is, based on your background is, you were brought up, with a lot of constructs of what you should be and what you shouldn't be, right? And that's another thing I think is really interesting during this time, this kind of transition into midlife and settling into midlife, is almost this letting go, right? Of who
Definitely.
you were. For some, the thoughts and beliefs that you've carried for so long. And it's an opportunity to not just reinvent, because I'm not saying that anybody needs to kind of let go of who they were, but it's kind of evolve and take the things that are most important to them and really continue to nurture those pieces, and maybe give oneself enough grace to let go of things that have not been serving you, right, in the past.
I think there's an armor that we as women are taught to wear, right? We are supposed to be the good daughter, the good mother, the dutiful wife. There's this armor, right, that we walk into the early years, through our 20s, I think, trying, at least the majority of us, I think, are trying to fit into this like script of sorts, whether that script is written from an Eastern perspective or a Western perspective, but there's definitely a script, right? And I think a lot of what midlife is about, and a lot of what we'll be talking about, is how you start to shed that armor to get to who you really are. And a lot of the fracturing that happens at different levels is because that armor never really suited you, you know? And so I think it's important, to understand that transitioning through your 20s and 30s into your 40s and 50s is a lot about kind of reintroducing yourself to you. Who are you after you've sort of played out all these different roles?
I would say that the armor that I wore for so many years, I had to wear, right? Because I had to survive. I came from, a pretty topsy-turvy background. My parents were divorced. My father was an alcoholic. My mother suffered from, varying degrees of depression. I'm very functioning, but, she also got breast cancer when I was a teenager. And so there was like just a lot of independence that I had to wear and self what's the word, like when you just have to survive. It's like
Yeah.
survivor instinct. And
Survivor mode. Yeah.
so that armor that led me through kind of my 20s and well into my 30s was important at the time. Along with, let's be honest, right? There are so many of us that buy into this recipe. I call it like the gold standard of like, you believe that there are these gold medals in heaven waiting for you. Like, I'm going to get a gold medal for natural childbirth. I'm going to get a gold medal for breastfeeding. I'm going to get a gold medal for even getting married, right?
Oh my God,
I'm going to get a gold medal for
yeah.
going to college,
True.
And my message to so many women is that there are no gold medals. Okay. They're not standing at the pearly gates and they're not handing them out. And that is to your point about, as we settle into midlife, we have all of a sudden these moments of reflection where I think that becomes more apparent. And so we're able to shed the armor. But it's a process. And I think you see it in women. I've seen it through all the conversations that I've had through the Midlife Truth Project. What are you seeing in your patients and how they're navigating this transition?
I think women honestly are suffering. I don't know how else to say it. I think that because of the lack of conversation around it at an early age, right? I know we've had a push recently into menopause, but I feel like these conversations need to be happening in your 30s really to prepare you for what's coming next. I think people get surprised. And then when they get surprised, they get desperate. Suddenly it's the brain fog, it's the weight gain, it's a hot flash or a night sweat, it's the inability to get pregnant. It's the inability to sleep. It's the lack of desire to have sex. Like, depending on the patient and the woman, the story may change, right? It's always individualized. But I think it's the element of surprise that is very frustrating to women and then hits them in different ways. For some, it's like a slow kind of like, okay, something's off, something's not quite right. I don't feel good. And it's not enough to motivate them to land in my office, right? But it is enough to make them snappy and irritable and maybe push their husband away or, push their children away, or enough where a colleague might notice it at work that they're not productive, or, there's a ramp up of anxiety of some kind. So for some, it's very slow, and then it crescendos over time and gets to a point where they actually, okay, something's wrong. For others, it's out of the blue, or it feels like it's out of the blue, right? All of a sudden they've gained 20 pounds, suddenly they're losing their hair, their skin's changing. It's a lot of these physical symptoms. And unfortunately for women, this is just being honest and truthful. I feel like it catches our attention when it's attached to our physical looks first. When we lose hair, our skin changes, we get the belly, we gain weight. And then secondly, when it impacts our mental health and maybe our emotional health. And lastly, our relationships. And some of that order we need to change, right? Because what's happening, if you look at divorce rates and some of what's going out there, in society and culture, you'll see the timing of these physical changes correlate to the timing of divorce, right? Like of the escalation of divorce, which is happening usually in that year 15 to 18 for a lot of marriages, and those are two partners going through physical and chemical changes while also maybe shedding their armor of however they started on their roads, and finding themselves in very different places from each other, or creating tension in a relationship, which if each had more understanding of the other, maybe that gap or maybe that sort of divide would not have been there to begin with, So I think that, it hits women in so many different ways. There's always a wake-up call. That wake-up call, one of the things I do in practice is I'll always timeline out a patient's story. I always find it fascinating, to kind of look at how their things have progressed. That wake-up call is sometimes physical, but sometimes it's a relationship issue. There's a divorce, there's a child that was super sick, there's something that has happened within this unit that the woman has been responsible for that has now forced this reckoning. But what the majority of women will do, and this is what I hope will change, majority of women won't do anything until they get this wake-up call. They won't go and search for information about their mind, their body, their emotions, their spirit, all these different things. Maybe they don't have the luxury, right? Time is a luxury for a lot of women in midlife. You're raising children, you have a family, you might have parents you're taking care of, you might have responsibilities in the community, you may have a job that's peaking kind of at the same time. So time might be a luxury, but what we want to help women understand, or at least a lot of what I talk about, is that, this is not a luxury. This is a necessity to take the time and energy and effort to understand you and your responsibility with how you're conducting yourself in a work relationship, in a personal relationship, as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, all these different things that we do. And so I see it across the board. I see the whispers and I see the big slaps in the face. I see the calls to action. I see the life changes triggered because, there's been a lot of personal stuff going on. I get to see it all. But I think what I would love women to do is let's not wait till the car crashes. Let's actually do some preventive work on the front end so that you are able to handle whatever's next with grace and ease rather than feeling like you've just been sort of thrown to the ground.
Yes, yes, and yes, right? I mean, I always like to say it's not a question of, if these waves are going to come crashing down, and there's a series of them. It's a question of when, right? And for some people like me, I was hit by a series of waves with just enough time to kind of come up for air and take a big breath before I was hurled into the next wave and tousled underneath, whatever riptide it was without, that's what it felt like. And so that is part of the reason why I am so passionate and have been for many years about amplifying, all of these transitions that women go through. That midlife is not just about menopause. It is about a myriad of transitions that are all happening at the same time, and shining a light on those so that women can recognize that this is hard. I mean, yes. And by the way, it can be amazing as well. And we're going to talk a lot about that in episode 2 with Chip Conley, who we're going to interview in the next episode. As someone who spent years working in the beauty industry, I'm completely drawn to all the innovation and science behind skincare products. And let's be honest, if it doesn't hydrate or brighten or firm the skin, then what's the point? That's why I'm totally obsessed with Womaness's Overnight Magic Cream. The only problem is that it should probably be called Everyday Magic Skin Cream because it's the first thing I put on in the morning and the last thing I put on at night. I'm serious, it's total perfection, the perfect amount of hydration for day and night. It's also never greasy or heavy on my skin, and my skin just feels firmer and definitely looks brighter. It's available nationwide at Ulta Beauty, also on Amazon and Womaness.com. And guess what? You're going to get 20% off orders of $50 or more when you go to womaness.com/midlife and use the code midlife20. That's midlife20 at checkout. Womaness, live fully, age well. I want to just go back a little bit and give people, just a few, I hope people out there will nod their head, be like, oh yeah, why is that? I'm 53. I was probably around 46 when I found myself super weepy. And I'll never forget it. My friend Jen was sitting on my back porch, which is kind of where we gather. And I was crying. I was just really crying. And she looked at me and she's like, oh God, she's like, this is going to get this is heavy. This is real, sister. What's going on? And it started for me just feeling a tremendous sense of loneliness. And it was because I was feeling that some of my relationships, my friendships, they were evolving, the people that I thought that I had kind of grown up would raise my kids with. I kind of woke up and I was like, are they really my friends? Or were we friends because our kids were friends? And some of my oldest relationships, they were far away. And then there was questions about my kids just didn't seem to need me as much. So I didn't feel that ongoing everyday validation that I think so many mothers do feel and get a little bit addicted to be quite honest. And then, obviously relationship issues that are natural after you've been with someone for 20, 25 years, and him not seeing me in where I was in that moment, or seemingly not seeing me. And it didn't even dawn on me. And I think this is changing because menopause is starting, like not even starting, it's becoming a more robust conversation. So I think people may become more aware of the anxiety and the emotions that hover during our 40s, and that now they can finally say, oh, it might be this. But at least in many parts of the country, though, and all of the women that I've spoken to, they don't necessarily. Just because we get it on our feed doesn't mean other people are getting it.
Right.
And I've interviewed many people who are absolutely not in the know, right? And I personally, I live in a resourced community. I like to consider myself a go-getter. But that all being said, I think one of the things, and I really want people to know this, and then I'm going to ask you another question, is I was most surprised. I found my husband and I found ourselves, and I'm not ashamed to admit this because I think I'm a big believer in therapy in all shapes and forms. I think it can be unbelievably helpful however you get it. And so my husband and I were seeing, a therapist. And during our initial, I don't know how many months it was, not once during like all of my tears, and all of my friends, not once did she even ask or question like where I was in my cycle or in my hormones. And it was just amazing to me but I can't blame her, right? Because so much of our medical society, they don't know. So anyway, so that was a little bit about my story, and I happily, went on from there. But I wonder, can you share with us, because I think your story is a little bit different. Can you share with us, what your midlife transition was like, and if there was anything that caught you by surprise that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so my story is different. And part of it, I think, is from the symptom component, like whether it's anxiety, a shorter period, hot flashes, night sweats. I already knew about all that, right? Like my profession trained me for all of that and the work that I do day in and day out. So that wasn't my issue as much. I kind of had a good formula for me and knew how to, take care of myself and things like that. Mine hit me externally. It hit me through my family, which was really unexpected. I was not prepared for it. And it hit me in a couple of different ways. First of all, my daughter, who is now 16, and I don't think we're necessarily out of the woods, but when she hit middle school, which would have been, 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm 52, so that was me in my late 40s. When she hit middle school, we just had, honestly, a crisis with her where she just descended into darkness. She developed an eating disorder. She hated her school. She was suffering from terrible anxiety and even depression. Here I am, super busy, traveling everywhere. So it took me a minute, to even catch that was her issue, right? Like, as much as and I feel for women out there, like as much as we know intellectually, catching some of these things happening is a whole different story, So for me, it was a couple of different things. We lost my mother-in-law. My daughter started having these issues. And my husband kind of went dark too at the same time, to be 100% honest. And I think, he would, if he was sitting here, admit to that. But these people around me kind of flailing, like, I could always depend on him as being like this rock solid, family guy, who always had my back. And now like that was questionable. And she was always this cute little girl who like I went to school and came home and did her thing. And now she was struggling. And, then at work, there were some things that happened there too that were, hauntingly hurtful and, at the level of betrayal and all that other stuff. And so I'm taking these hits on the outside. It's not my internal chemistry. It's more the outside that's happening. So it forced me to do a deep reckoning of me. Like, what is my role in all of these things happening around me? Have I contributed to these? Have I, ignored them? Is there something I'm doing in my behavior while I'm also trying to get help for all these other people in my life, right? And one of the things that it forced me to reckon with is that I had to evolve. I had to evolve as a human being. I, med school, residency, the competitive type A, I'm going to get things done. You're not going to beat that out of me. That's too ingrained, right? But that doesn't work with people that you love. And you can't have a linear path always to fixing things when you're dealing with the human spirit. And so while I was so good at what I do, right, so good at data and labs and interpretation and accomplishing things and checking boxes and getting those gold medals that you talk about, I got those, I had really failed as I entered into my mid 40s at understanding the human spirit and its complexity. And so for me, watching these people around me struggle, and then even me personally being pushed into, like just because A plus B, or maybe that's a bad analogy, it's just because 1 + 1 = 2, that math doesn't work for everybody around you. There are layers to it, and that's not their reality, and that's not their truth. And you can either get angry and judgmental and like wave your fist and be like, how can you not understand that? A, B, C, D. Like what part of that do you not understand? Or you can pull back and you can take a deep breath and you can start to understand that people are struggling and suffering and that each of their perspective is their own. And if you want to be in their lives and a companion and an advocate for them, then you have a personal responsibility to get off your high horse and meet them where they are. And for me, it was a emotional and a spiritual evolution that my type A go-getter mentality, problem solving everything and fixing everything was not going to work this time around. And instead, I had to learn to put myself in their shoes. I had to learn to let go of maybe even what the right answer was, right? I know the answer, but I had to learn that just because I know the answer doesn't mean I'm right. And I had to really, sort of understand where they are. So, I had a number of experiences, really dark days. I think I described some of those to you where, my husband was in a horrible place. I honestly didn't know what was going to happen next. And I remember, and I don't mind sharing this, like sitting in my home office and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm writing in these journals. I love to journal and keep track of things. And I remember clearly 3 o'clock in the morning, this voice coming through being like, you have to love these people through this. You have to love him through this. You have to love them through this. And I'm like, what? And then like, it came again. You have to love them through this, And so for me, it was putting down the armor of what I had to build, to your point, to succeed in the family home and in the career that I had built. I too was the responsible member of our childhood family. I was the one that navigated everything. I was the one that brought peace and stability. I was the linear, logical one, right? And those same traits served me well in becoming a doctor and getting into medical school. I could be logical and linear, ER, right? I can watch chaos around me, but I could focus, But this time it was different. It was a call to not focus. It was a call to love and to put away that fighting mentality, right? That fighter, that survival mentality, to put it away and put it in a box because it wasn't serving anybody very well right now. And so we went on a journey of getting help, all of us, and communicating in a different way. And I feel like that my ability to recognize the transition that I personally needed to make is what created the transition in everybody else around me, And our marriage took a different turn. Our daughter took a different turn. We found peace in the home. I approached my business and my people differently at work. And I'm still learning, right? That was only 5 or 6 years ago. So we're still on this learning journey and we're still on a path to learning. So midlife for me was spiritual and emotional, not physical, and was a reckoning with my past, to be 100% honest. Like, what was it from my past that kept me blocked to a certain extent, but also allowed me to survive? And what of those skills from my teens and 20s and 30s was it time to bury and let go of, you know? And that's been an evolving journey, and, is something that we all continue to work on every single day. So for me, that's what my midlife transition looked like.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing
Of
that. I think,
course. Yeah.
imagine if you had faced that kind of spiritual reckoning, like in the basement hormonally, like that you weren't yourself, that you didn't have capacity to hear the voice.
Correct. Such a good point. Yeah.
And so that is, my journey was completely the opposite, right? Because it took me by storm emotionally, which was directly, correlated to the hormone shift that I was going through. And so it was affecting every part of my life. I didn't even talk about, the professional side. I mean, the shame I had around my career, or at the time, lack thereof. Like, I was just so shameful that my career looked like an EKG instead of a hockey stick. And because, again, the gold medals that I had told myself I was supposed to achieve, and a lot of should have and would have and could have, scenarios as my monkey brain just went awry, the hormones not helping. But so by following these breadcrumbs of slowly trying to get my health back on track, and then, to your point, beginning to have the capacity to go inward and saying, who am I right now? What is going on with me? And I learned, through different authors and different life coaches and different conversations, which I found to be like my deepest relationships, is that I really needed to give myself more grace, and just recognize and learn to say things out loud. I always say to folks, if you can say something out loud, it takes it off your heart, and it puts it out into the world where you can look at it, you can touch it, you can feel it. Because sometimes when you have it on your heart and you can't say it out loud, it's too heavy. Understanding that this is normal is half the battle, right? So understanding that we're not alone, that other women are going through this, because I had so much shame in terms of what was happening to me. I felt like my whole world was crumbling at times. And then saying to yourself, I'm going to stay curious. I'm going to figure this out, right? To your point, for my family, for my kids, for my relationship, because I am a daughter, because I am a sister. And so I think it's just that ability to kind of stay curious, interested and interesting.
I think so. I mean, I think it's important for everyone to understand that we have to transition. Like, this is not about staying 20 forever, and we have to. And it's a good transition when we can put the pieces together. And the gifts that come, I think, outweigh some of the hits and the losses. But you have to have the capacity, to your point. You're not going to hear, any kind of callings or have any kind of visions or be able to dream even if you're just fighting through the day, And so, understanding that your physical body impacts your mental, your emotional, your spiritual, your community. I think that's a tenet that every woman should understand and hold on to. And when they're getting those hits, how do you see yourself through them? And how do you get on the other side of it? Because the other side is usually a gift. And that's what I've told women over and over again.
Amazing. Okay, well, we're going to transition to the last part of this conversation about what can we expect? Who's coming to be on this journey, and who's going to talk about these different transitions?
Well, I think we have such an incredible lineup. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get into these conversations. So again, this is an audio journey. So really each conversation is leading sort of to the next topic. So we have a conversation with Chip Conley, who, as many people know, he's a midlife guru. He's an entrepreneur, a mentor, an author, a TED talker. We could talk about him forever. And then we're going to move into a hormone conversation, and that's with Dr. Sharon Malone. Many of you already know Sharon Malone. She is one of the OGs in menopause care. She's an advocate. She's the chief medical officer of Alloy, and then she's the author of the most recently released book, Road Women Talk. Can't wait for us to exchange ideas there. I think that should be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about family, right? I think, for midlife, family is a big theme. So we're going to talk about family with Kelly Corrigan. She's an author and podcast host of My Favorite Kelly Corrigan Wonders and PBS host of Tell Me More.
I'm gonna have to chime in on the Kelly thing
Yeah, go for it.
Because I've followed Kelly forever. I'm a huge super fan, and when we say, and the reason why I think this episode is also really important is because we're calling this Midlife Truth Families Change. Because, and this is not just an episode for mothers. If you have kids, if you don't have kids,
Yeah.
it's families change in so many different ways during midlife. So we have aging parents, right? And even if they're not necessarily at a point where they need significant care now, it's coming, right? So how do we begin to have those conversations? How do you begin to just manage the ache?
Right.
And if you are a mom, you're growing teens, but if you're an aunt to nieces and nephews, I mean, there's just so many different dynamics to families. So anyway, so I'm really excited for that conversation with Kelly.
That's a big one. But the next one's big too. Sex. We're going to talk about sex, right? Sex is complicated. We're going to talk about sex with Dr. Kelly Casperson. She's amazing. She's a urologist, now creating a movement, an awakening, and an expert mentor around sex education for adults. So yes, we are going to talk about sex. I'm sure we have lots of conversation around there. We're also going to talk about money. I think this is a really important topic because it's a transitional time. Understanding money, especially, families are changing, right? Where is money? Money's a currency as well. So planning ahead with Jean Chatzky, who I have admired for years. She's a fellow Today Show contributor. I think she's amazing. She'll explain everything about finances in a way we can actually understand them. And then we'll talk to Gabby Reese, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, and she's a badass. She's incredible. She's taken that same grit of her athleticism and now translated it onto her platform. She's, as many of you know, a professional volleyball player, a sports announcer, an entrepreneur, and she has her own podcast as well. And then we're going to talk about game changers. And I've got to give a shout out to one of my favorite women in the entire world, Sara Blakely. Love her spirit, love her spark. But of course, Miss Sara, founder of Spanx, now an advocate, a philanthropist. She's got more up her sleeve. I can't wait for her to share her journey with us and what her experience through midlife is. And here's a hint, guys, she's not even done. If you thought Spanx was it for her, not even done. She's got a lot more cooking. So can't wait to bring her on the show as well.
So they all tie together. And so we just want to really take a holistic look at midlife and all its twists and turns. I did want to just let everyone know that the second episode with Chip Conley has already dropped. It is an amazing, heartfelt, real conversation with Chip, who Taz has already talked about. I have his book right here, Learning to Love Midlife. It is 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. So much goodness in there. He's also the founder of MEA, which is the Modern Elder Academy. So look that up. And I also just want to let everyone know that you can find this on YouTube. You can watch us live there, and you can also, it's all, wherever you watch your podcast or listen to your podcast. So the last thing I wanted to say is that before we wrap officially is that we've built some guiding tenets for this conversation, and I'm just going to read them here because I think it's going to make everyone feel good about how we're going to approach these conversation partners. The first is that we aim in every conversation to lead with curiosity and empathy. The second is that we're going to allow ourselves, just like we did today, to be vulnerable and share. The third is, this is something that I learned from a dear friend and colleague. Her name is Lindsay Hurdy. If you're out there, Lindsay, I got this from you. It's the notion that it's in silence is where we grow. So we're going to welcome the pause. We're going to, even though it might seem awkward, if there's an awkward silence in a conversation, we're going to lean into it. And then we're also going to recognize that all of these discussions that we're having are simply a point of view. It's not a fact. It's not medical advice. It's just really meant as perspective, understanding, and insight. And we're hoping that you will give us your opinion by giving us feedback and reviews on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Please subscribe. Please tell your friends. And also, please stay tuned by following us on Instagram. I'm at Julie Flakstad, and on Facebook, I'm on the Julie Flakstad. And what are you, Taz?
I'm at Dr. Taz MD, DRTAZ MD, pretty much everywhere. So you'll find me if on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all with that handle.
And I implore you, if you have topics or questions that you want to discuss, we are checking them. So please, please, please put in any comments anywhere. We will find them and we will try to address them. So let's talk truth. Until next time.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And we can't wait for our next midlife truth called Windows Open, together with entrepreneur, visionary, and founder of the Modern Elder Academy, Chip Conley. See you soon.